Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar on maximising your Office 365 investment with Citrix Workspace. So, first thing we're going to talk about is Office 365 and how it's changed how businesses approach the cloud. Effectively, it's been a bit of a lightning rod in terms of inspiring organizations to start to transition some of their critical systems into cloud services. And this is largely due to the fact that many layers of the business understand the key benefits that are delivered by this type of solution. So from the CFO level, they appreciate the benefits of the predictable spending cycles, the transition from CapEx to OpEx when buying solutions, and the lack of long-term commitments, and the fact that the costs of the solution are directly related to the consumption of the services. IT like the 365 services because it's less to manage. The more that moves into the cloud, the less day-to-day management they have to take responsibility for those solutions. Not having to take care of upgrades is always a fantastic benefit. So moving away from those kind of onerous days of having to do kind of large-scale exchange upgrades is always fantastic. And simplified management of users and licenses, being able to go to kind of web consoles to drive activities and using standardized systems. And users also like the 365 services because it gives them the ability to be able to consume those services from a location of their choosing, from a device of their choosing. They like the fact that they have kind of cloud storage available for their documents, and the fact that they're getting regular updates and they're getting new capabilities they consume to help them work smarter. So what we're going to be talking about today is how we can drive utilization of some of these 365 services. And one of the areas that we see some customers finding some challenges in terms of being able to consume these services is around the area of cloud storage. So one of the benefits of Office 365 is that you effectively get all you can eat cloud storage. So this comes in a couple of different forms. So obviously users get a certain storage entitlement for OneDrive for Business. Now, this can kind of scale up to 25 terabytes. I believe Microsoft will actually automatically scale the per user storage entitlement to. So that's a significant amount of storage which is actually available. And if you kind of think about how much it would cost you to be able to provision that amount of storage for each one of your users, that's potentially a significant amount of value that you can actually utilize for no additional cost out of the 365 solution. We also have SharePoint Online. So as part of your 365 licensing, you'll have an element of SharePoint Online storage, which is available to you. And that can be used for things like team sites, which can be used in place of maybe departmental file shares, which you may be maintaining today. So there's actually a significant amount of cloud storage, which is available to you as part of your 365 licensing. So what we want to talk about a little is some of the challenges that we're seeing around this today. And this is based on conversations we have with customers and engagements we have with customers where we're deploying these 365 services, and some of the challenges that they encounter when they're trying to consume some of these new capabilities they have. So we'll have a little look at how files in Office 365 deployment actually work. So if we look at where we are today, typically what we have is we'll have a set of user home shares. So this is where users' personal data resides. Maybe it's their personal working area where they store documents and content while they're working on it before it's finalized. And then we have a set of departmental file shares, which may be documents which they're collaborating on with colleagues, or reference material which is available to other departments. These will generally be more widely available within the organization. Some organizations will have SharePoint deployed as well internally for document management. So we may have project sites or team sites with document libraries in those. Now, if we look at how this can change when we start to look at utilizing some of the cloud storage as part of the 365 deployment, things get a little bit interesting. So looking at a survey that Citrix ran in 2018, a lot of customers, so 94% of customers, aren't actually moving documents from legacy file shares. So one of the things that we find is that moving user data can be quite straightforward because it can be a simple lift and shift operation. However, for departmental shares, that's where things get challenging due to the level of collaboration that happens in those, maybe internal references to those documents. It can be more onerous to actually move those. So 94% of customers aren't actively planning on moving that data, which presents us with a little bit of a challenge. So in the event that we don't actually move that data, this is the type of topology that we end up looking at. So we still have some departmental shares which may reside on local file servers. We have a set of team sites which we may still be maintaining on premises. We may still maintain some project sites on premises, but we've moved some of our user data into OneDrive for Business. Okay, so we're starting to consume some of the cloud storage we have available. And we may deploy some new team sites into SharePoint Online. Now, this is kind of a quite typical approach where customers may take the approach of we'll deploy new into the cloud and we'll tackle data migration at a later date. The downside of that is that we end up with what is effectively data sprawl. So we've then taken 2 potential locations where we're storing data, and then we've then moved that into 4. So all of those will have different management systems. All of those will have different governance policies. All of those will have different security models. So what that's done is increase the overall complexity of the file storage solutions that we're deploying in our environment, which obviously isn't desirable. From a user perspective as well, the user experience can be a challenge because when you're storing files in multiple locations, it can be challenging for them to understand where things need to go, how to access certain types of content. Is it going to be in OneDrive for Business? Is it going to be in SharePoint Online? Is it in our on-premises SharePoint? Is it in a file share? And as soon as you're making things more challenging for users, that's going to impact on their adoption of those new services. From a management perspective, the security policies can be a critical one, especially when we're considering potentially sensitive data. We need to make sure that where possible, we're applying consistent security frameworks across all the environments. And again, when we're mixing cloud and on-premises, that can be challenging. So another common challenge that we come across especially in the Citrix world, is challenges accessing some cloud content from a virtual environment. So one of the classic challenges we have is around OneDrive for Business. So from a physical endpoint, it can be quite a straightforward move to be able to migrate data into OneDrive for Business. But with virtual desktops, we have the challenge of potentially they're going to be deployed in a non-persistent manner. Now, OneDrive leverages caching fairly extensively to be able to give users a performance solution to make sure that data is available as and when they need it. Obviously, this doesn't necessarily apply quite as nicely to a virtual non-persistent environment by virtue of the fact that caching doesn't work in that type of topology. Now, from the Microsoft support stance as well, the OneDrive for Business Sync app isn't supported in virtual desktop sessions, either persistent or non-persistent, which obviously from a supportability standpoint also presents a significant challenge. So also, if we look at challenges around how we can actually leverage these solutions for external, accessing content between companies. So if we look at this as a little example, so we've got ABC company, we've got Jim, who has a large video file which they want to share with Lisa at an external company. So When they're on premises, this is fine. They can maybe use their existing solution, which kind of may well be like a public-facing FTP server, which Jim can access. They've got access configured through the firewall to enable that. So Jim can take a copy of that video file, upload it to Lisa, and then she can access that file. Now that's nice and simple, but one of the things that I'd point out there is that once that file's copied, Jim's then lost control of that file completely. So that is then owned and managed by Lisa. Now, if we look at how this works if Jim is outside of the office. So in this scenario, Jim's about to go on a business trip. He's at the airport and Lisa's just called him and said, can you send me the latest version of that video file? So what Jim then has to do is he has to pull out his device, be that a laptop or it may be a tablet device which he's using. He can then VPN into his corporate network. He can then, now he's effectively connected to their corporate WAN. He can then say, okay, I can get to that data. What I'm going to do is email that over to Lisa. Oh, we can't do that because that file's too big. Oh dear. So I know we've got some cloud storage available. So what I can do is copy that large file into OneDrive for Business. So we're taking data from our departmental shares, and then Jim's going to take a copy of that and drop it into his personal OneDrive for Business folder. Oh, sorry, his own OneDrive for Business folder. Now, that's going to potentially take a little while because it's got to upload it into OneDrive. Now, once it's in OneDrive, he can then say, right, I can generate a link for that, which is fantastic, and I can send that link over to Lisa so she can access that file. So what's just happened there? So from the end user perspective, he's got to take a few steps to actually share that file externally. So he's had to VPN into the network. He's had to access the file on the network share. He's had to copy that into his own OneDrive for Business location. And then once the copy's finished, he's emailed the link to the collaborator. So from the IT perspective, you've then got a couple of challenges which have been introduced as part of that process. You've then got duplicate files. So say, for example, that video file is sensitive. You've then got to consider the fact that that file now exists in 2 particular locations. We've also got the fact that potentially it's stored in 2 locations, which would increase your storage costs, which is obviously not going to be desirable. Now, we've potentially got different security settings and controls applied to those different locations because obviously one is a departmental share and one is a personal OneDrive location. And moving the data in between these locations can make oversight a little bit challenging, or at least understanding the purpose of the data in those particular locations can be a bit more challenging. So if we take a look at how this can work, so if that data is in OneDrive for Business already, then we can just natively generate a link for that file. And we can say, great, let's email that over. Here's the next challenge. So permissions. Permissions in OneDrive for Business can be a little bit challenging. So referring back to the Microsoft support position, sharing permissions in OneDrive for Business are subsidiary to sharing permissions in SharePoint because OneDrive is obviously based on the SharePoint architecture. Where you have external sharing disabled for SharePoint, which is quite a common stance to take because obviously SharePoint will typically hold departmental or project-based data, which you may not wish to share externally. Now, if you've disabled external sharing on SharePoint, then you can't turn it on for OneDrive. So that's an important thing to understand, is that if you want to have external sharing enabled for OneDrive, then you have to have sharing globally enabled within SharePoint, because the permissions in SharePoint can be more permissive than what you allow in OneDrive, but it can't be less permissive. So that's, again, really important to understand just in terms of data governance. So let's take a look at content collaboration as part of Citrix Workspace. So content collaboration is the new name for what was known as Citrix ShareFile. So some of you may be familiar with that in its with its previous branding. So where we say content collaboration, that's kind of interchangeable with ShareFile. So if I slip between the two, then apologies. It's a force of old habit. So in terms of EFSS solution, so enterprise file sync and sharing. So this is the category of products which this falls into. Gartner believed that when a single EFSS option is not optimal for all use cases, organizations choose to deploy a combination. So the specific example they've called out in their report is that often they combine Microsoft OneDrive for internal user productivity and a hybrid EFSS product such as Citrix ShareFile for external collaboration. So what this is saying is that many organizations will utilize scenarios where they use OneDrive for Business for a storage resource, and they'll use it for internal file collaboration, and then they'll use another product such as Citrix ShareFile or content collaboration for providing the external collaboration functionality. So how does this actually work? So with content collaboration as part of Citrix Workspace, we have the ability to tick off some fairly significant boxes. So we can enable the external sharing of files from multiple locations in your organization. So we can do this with a variety of security controls. And this is all about providing unified access. So if we go back to our previous topology where we were looking at 4 potential locations where we've got data stored, we've got departmental shares, we've got on-premises SharePoint, we've got team sites in SharePoint Online, and we've got OneDrive for Business. Content collaboration can unify all of those into one single view, one single pane of glass for users to access. By virtue of the fact that it's part of the Citrix Workspace stack, we're also able to deliver those that content into virtual apps and desktops environments. One of the newer features that we have through Citrix Workspace is that this content doesn't actually have to leave your network. We have the ability to be able to present it to users by giving them direct access to those documents that you have in your data repositories via virtual applications published from your Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop solution as well. So that's kind of one use case, which is obviously very specific to a Citrix Workspace solution. And obviously, in terms of delivery, as we'd expect from Citrix, access from multiple form factors is a standard. So from tablets and mobile devices, from Macs, from Linux devices, from Windows workstations or laptops, we have the same standard unified user experience that we'd expect from a Citrix solution. So if we remember the challenges that we had with the external sharing for OneDrive for Business, let's take a look at how this looks different when we use content collaboration. So Jim's still at the airport and Lisa's still asking for her video files. So what Jim's going to do is he's going to pull out his mobile phone. He's got the Citrix Workspace app installed on his mobile device. He can then select the document or the video file that he wants to send to Lisa. And he then natively has the ability to either get a direct link for that file or to email that to Lisa using the ShareFile service. And that's it. So there's no VPN, there's no moving files around. We've instantly enabled external collaboration with Lisa and Jim. And because we're not actually emailing files, we're not duplicating files, we're lowering our storage costs. Now, we can also apply these same concepts to email attachments. So email attachments tend to be the default mechanism that users will go to for sharing files. So if somebody says, can you send me a file? The first thought is I'm going to fire up an email and I'm going to attach it. Now, that's not always going to be the best way to do that, but it tends to be route one for most users. So content collaboration has a Outlook add-in that we can use, which can intelligently manage these email attachments. So we can configure rules on there saying anything over a certain size, I want to automatically convert that into a ShareFile link. So we can see in the picture on the presentation that we've added a PowerPoint deck to our email, and the ShareFile plugin has automatically grabbed that, and it said, well, this exceeds the size limit, so I'm going to convert that into a link without the user having to drive any processes there. It just happens automatically when the file's attached. And they can send that email, and then rather than sending the actual file, again, the recipient is just going to receive a link which they can use to access that document. Now, against that link, we can then configure various controls. So we can say, well, do we require a sign-in? Do we need to provide the recipient with credentials to be able to access that? How long do we want that link to be valid for? And again, all these policy controls can be applied regardless of whether or not they're being sent via email or whether it's being sent via any other medium. We can define the expiry period. So how long do we want that link to be valid for? Do we want it to be valid for a day, 3 days, 7 days, a month, a year? Do you want them to be able to just view the content, or do you want them to be able to download and edit it? How many times do you want them to be able to access it? And do I want to know when the user's actually received it? So that's a big one for some companies. So if they want to know that a particular document is being received by the recipient, then having the ability to be notified when that user's actually obtained that content can be a really valuable tool. Now, from a security standpoint as well, this can be quite interesting, because if you think of the number of instances that you see in the media about users accidentally disclosing information, protected information, by sending attachments to an incorrect distribution list, or they might mistype an email address. With classic email, if you've attached sensitive information, once that's been sent, it's gone. So you then have no control over how that's handled. You have to rely on the other party's responsibility to be able to handle that data. Now, if you're using content collaboration to handle your email attachments, then once it's sent, you still have control. So you're able to revoke that link. You're able to, so if you've configured it to require a login, then obviously if the email has gone to the wrong recipient, then without that login, they're not able to access that content. So from a security perspective and a control and governance perspective, this can be a useful protective mechanism as well. From a security and governance perspective as well, there's some interesting integrations with Citrix Analytics. So Citrix Analytics has the ability to be able to analyze user behavior to understand what's normal and what's not. So this works on the basis of understanding how a user normally works, how they normally interact with various system components, and to be able to identify when there's any deviation from their norm. So, for example, if a user typically doesn't access a lot of sensitive information, if they don't typically interact with that much content within Citrix content collaboration, if all of a sudden Citrix Analytics detects that actually all of a sudden somebody who has typically a fairly low volume of usage now is accessing tens or hundreds of sensitive files, and all those files are being updated, then it can increase their risk level. Now, what this risk level does is it takes feeds from a variety of inputs. So within the Citrix solution stack, all the core components will be feeding data into the analytics solution. It also has the ability to receive feeds from external providers such as Azure. So, for example, Azure Identity Protection has feeds into Citrix Analytics. Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection also has feeds into Citrix Analytics. So, based on the perceived risk level, based on the metrics which are fed into Citrix Analytics, we have the ability to automatically remediate some threats. So if we see the risk level of a particular user increasing, then we have the ability to implement some closed loop responses to that. For example, we may disable their access temporarily. So if we're seeing a high churn in files being updated, which is abnormal, this could be something like a ransomware attack, for example, where all of a sudden a lot of files are being updated. They may be being encrypted. We have the ability to automatically revert to earlier versions of documents. We can quarantine the user. We can revoke access to links they may have sent externally. So these are all actions that can be driven by automated analysis of how a user is working. So if we see something that's unusual, if we see something which is potentially threatening to your corporate security, then we can automatically respond to that and put in place some protective measures. So I think one of the most important things with ShareFile or content collaboration is the fact that you have the ability to store your data anywhere you want. Now, we talked about the challenge of migrating data. Now, some of this may be caused by compliance or regulatory requirements. So, for example, there may be some data which you cannot move to the cloud, so you have to maintain it on premises. You can maintain a hybrid solution with content collaboration quite easily because it gives you the flexibility to be able to integrate with multiple data sources and provide a single unified view of that data to the users to give them the simplest possible user experience. We can benefit from the operational procedures that you may have. So, for example, you may have some specific DLP policies which need applying to data, which you can only implement using your on-premises solution. You may have document management systems which you maintain on premises, which needs to store certain types of data. Now, being able to present the unified access to those gives you the flexibility of putting your data in the best location for that data and being able to provide the simple access. So rather than having to move all your data into a place to enable the functionality, we can layer that functionality onto the data location of your choice. So leveraging OneDrive for Business and Citrix ShareFile and content collaboration, we can provide a more comprehensive and complete file sharing solution and collaboration solution for your users. Now, obviously, leveraging the OneDrive for Business storage fundamentally gives us a lot of capabilities for being able to reduce the storage footprint on premises, to be able to move certain data types into the cloud storage and gain value from that license entitlement as part of Office 365. But then Citrix ShareFile on top then gives us the more comprehensive solution, which gives us the external sharing, the security controls, the analytics, and workflow automation. So we haven't really gone over workflow because that's a kind of piece unto itself. But there are some very interesting automation capabilities that can be implemented using Citrix content collaboration. So to recap, we'll have a look at some of the challenges that Citrix resolves. So the slow migration and legacy infrastructure. So migration is always going to be a long tail when it comes to data. So unless you're extremely lucky and you have limited amounts of data which you have to maintain on premises, it can take a long time to tackle any migration of that data. Even to a new solution on premises, it can be a major challenge. Moving that to cloud storage, where potentially there are completely different operational processes around it, can be a drawn out process to actually achieve. External collaboration can be an area where people find a lot of challenges. So not having the granular controls or the governance in place to be able to securely enable external collaboration can be a challenge for people using the native 365 capabilities. And Compatibility with virtual environments. So the OneDrive app isn't optimized for virtual environments. There are some interesting capabilities around the FS Logic solution, which we use for some customers to enable OneDrive for Business in virtual solutions. However, one of the challenges with that is that effectively you're then increasing your on-premises storage requirement, because this is just providing a different mechanism for you to enable the caching. So if you're moving data into the cloud, then increasing the storage requirement on premises to be able to facilitate the use of that cloud storage can add additional costs to the solution. So ShareFile and content collaboration enables us to provide access to OneDrive for Business without the need to increase our on-premises storage footprint to achieve that. So some key ways that Citrix improves Office 365. So data aggregation and modernization. So ShareFile enables users to access data from many silos. So ShareFile has connectors for multiple cloud storage providers, on-premises network file shares, on-premises and SharePoint Online. And these can all be integrated through a simplified, unified access point. Productivity and collaboration. So ShareFile makes it incredibly simple to collaborate with customers and partners. So anytime you need to share data, kind of be it a single document or be it gigabytes or terabytes of data, ShareFile makes it incredibly easy to be able to simply enable external collaboration on that data without surrendering control, and with the security controls and governance that most enterprises would require. And this leads us on to the governance and control. So it's the enhanced security for enterprise apps. And with the analytics capabilities layered on top, this gives you a high level of visibility in terms of how your data is being managed, how it's being accessed, and how it's being shared externally. So that's our overview of how Citrix Workspace can help drive the value of Office 365. Hopefully that was a useful overview. As I say, there are a few areas that we haven't quite touched on in terms of some of the more advanced capabilities, but this is really just a snapshot of how content collaboration can enable you to start to utilize some of those cloud storage solutions, which effectively you have available to you. It makes sense to use them where you can. With content collaboration on top of SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business, you can drive a really compelling, user-friendly way to start to consume some of your cloud storage entitlements and gain some of that additional value from your Office 365 licensing. So with that, I'll wrap up and I'll thank you all for joining. If anyone has any questions or would like some more information on content collaboration or migration to Office 365, then do please let us know. We're very happy to help. But with that, I'll thank you all for joining and hope you all have a great day. Thank you very much.